Welcome to Antidote Radio. This is Greg McCarran.
And Jeremy Rothkushel.
Jeremy, we joke sometimes about the some people who defend Trump will like go on and act as if like Trump's playing like what we joke about this. It's actually an exaggeration. 18-dimensional chess with the power brokers or whatever.
How dare you sell him short? He's already playing in 34 dimensions.
Well, more than likely. I mean, I'm sure, Alex Jones probably has a number like that to tell us about right now. But in reality, though, when you look at all joking aside, when you look at the geopolitical realities of the world and all that's going on, when you try to start connecting the pieces to this major puzzle or this grand chessboard, as Zbigniew Brzezinski called it, that is global geopolitics, you really find that there is a multi-dimensional chess game going on with all of the various pawns and the various structures and the various power vacuums that are at play and their affiliations and representations. It's very difficult to make a whole lot of sense of what's going on. I do feel like there is a chess game with all these dimensions to as far as how our geopolitics works, and it's something I don't think that anyone, no matter how versed they are, can ever completely, truly make sense of. But we'll do the best we can here to try and make sense of some of this stuff. And obviously, the big story right now is the ongoing belligerence against North Korea, and the most recent the continued ratcheting up of threats. And North Korea has long been in the crosshairs of the geopolitical establishment for its alleged belligerency when it comes to nuclear weapons, and how it doesn't want to follow or abide by the rules of the international power elite for as far as what they believe are the standards that all nations, of course it's hypocrisy, should adhere to. And so the saber rattling is going on against North Koreans again, now under Trump, and Trump is saying that North Korea is behaving very, very badly. And obviously North Korea is a close ally of China, which is a country that we've seen the ratcheting up of tensions under Trump, particularly his chief strategist Steve Bannon saying that there could be a war in China within 5 years, and the increased belligerency and hostile tone towards China, not only North Korea but also China, from the Trump administration. Jeremy, what are you getting out of this latest threatening stance taken against North Korea and by extension China?
Yes, well, you are definitely correct in that anyone who is at the highest levels of politics in this current world is playing many levels of chess. And when you throw in the personal characteristics and personal history of some of these people, it just adds to the internal dimensions to how all of this is playing out, and the changing alliances and the different modes of power politics. And of course, North Korea was, I believe, in the axis of evil, so coined by the recently reconceived and revivified the clean neocon David Frum, who has now been taken in by even W. Bush has been revivified by the anti-Trump aspects of the anti-Trump left at this point. Not the real left, of course, but so, and it was the axis of evil, I believe, was Iran, Iraq, and North Korea in terms of that original speech. And Iran and Iraq have been front and center for a long time. Iraq actually was then invaded based on deception, run through neoconservative circles such as the Office of Special Plans in the Pentagon, people like Michael Ledeen, who ran it through right-wing Italian intelligence and frauded up the intelligence around Iraq. And then Iran probably was already on the docket for some type of military attack, but it looks like it was stood down by different sane, patriotic elements of the U.S. military and intelligence establishment, probably multiple times. So North Korea is sort of on and off the radar. going back decades, actually. I remember it being much more on the radar under the Clinton years. And North Korea is a very deep connection, of course, to the U.S. empire. The Korean War, of course, helped split the peninsula. I haven't ever really been able to find this, but at the time of the original, some of the original WikiLeaks, the early WikiLeaks, I sort of remember seeing a statement by a high-level U.S. diplomat, I believe, to China, in a phrase where he was basically saying, if North Korea didn't exist, we would have to invent it. Sort of Al-Qaeda in a way. And, North Korea is basically the boogeyman of Asia in many ways. It's seen as a massive threat. It's not really a threat. It's basically been under threat by the U.S. For decades. And really, it really looks like that it could be that part of the impetus for the Korean War, in terms of splitting the Korean peninsula in a way, was to then have a North Korea that could be directly threatened and sanctioned in these types of things, basically as a sort of a threat proxy against China in a way. Over the decades. And because China, of course, was being worked into the neoliberal global complex and has become a key counter partner to the American debt and the outsourcing of American industry. So it does seem that the heat is being boiled quickly, actually, and I saw that there was a young North Korean woman who was being put up on a stand to speak against her experience in North Korea. It had, my wife Lori said, reminded her of the PR stunt run by Hill and Knowlton before the first Iraq
Babies in Incubators.
Babies in Incubators by the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador, I believe, who played the role of a nurse, saying she'd seen Iraqi soldiers throwing Kuwaiti babies out of incubators. And so there is some resonance of that right now. And at the same time, North Korea is used, it looks like, as a proxy by certain forces, certain gangster forces from the West, whether familially related, such as Rockefeller Rothschild, and directed towards the Japanese government in many ways, because you can think about how powerful it would be to have a close country to be able to run agents into Japanese territory and into Japanese government, posing as a Japanese sometimes. So those are some of the parameters of this, and as you pointed out when we were talking before, then there's this North Korean relationship with Iran, which also puts it at odds with Israel in some way. So it's not clear how all of this is going to resolve itself. But it does seem that North Korea is being used as a way to complete the pivot to Asia that was really begun in an economic way, in a big economic way, under Obama, and the direction towards the TPP, which of course Trump has stopped. But now the pivot to Asia has become a militaristic one, and trying to force China from what it feels is its rightful protectorate in the North China Sea, and these types of scenarios. So it works very much like an Al Qaeda, where it creates an opportunity for lots of saber rattling and a proxy saber rattling against China. So if this actually is is real this time, and there are. I mean, I do think we saw a story about Navy SEAL teams being deployed into North Korea. That seems to hint that this might actually go hot at some point. Let us pray that sane heads prevail as they have at key times in our history, whether during the Kennedy era and the times where the Cold War could have gone hot, or under the Bush and Obama regimes where things like a war against Iran were stood down, or war against Syria potentially were stood down. So yeah, it's I guess we're living in interesting times.
You can say that again. That's an understatement for sure. We definitely are living in interesting times. And the belligerency against North Korea and the propaganda against North Korea. I remember 3 or 4 years ago when you could go on Google Earth allegedly and see pictures of North Korean concentration camps via Google Earth where, human slave labor was being held and prisoners and all that. And so, I mean, the propaganda against North Korea is clearly nothing new. They've really made an effort to build Kim Jong-il, of course, and now now the current ruler, Kim Jong-un, is these just maniacal, backwards, insane people. Whether you're watching, Team America World Police by the creators of South Park, or you're listening to the media coverage of Kim Jong meeting with Dennis Rodman. I mean, the portrayal has been out there long of North Korea as being this backwards country run by maniacs, absolute maniacs who just have no regard for anything. They're homicidal enough to try to start a nuclear war with the most powerful country in the world simply if they can get the weapons, because they don't have any regard for their own people. Their people are starving to death, but they want to start a nuclear war because they're just fanatical, homicidal, backwards maniacs. And that, of course, that narrative is continuing. And when you take it in with China and you consider the whole Japanese element, there's this Japan is trying for the first time since the end of World War II to become a militarized power again. There's talk, I think there's been talk when you mentioned SEAL teams, there's been talk of actually having a team go in and remove Kim Jong-un physically. So that might be what you were alluding to with that. And obviously, you get a lot of these wise guys on television would come on and say that, oh, this is going to solve the problem. It'll be a great thing. But in reality, it would just be another horrifically criminal act to go in and have a military team take out a leader of a country. So there's all kinds of scenarios here with this. And you make a great point about the how the initial pivot to Asia under Obama was a more of an economic one, with the heightening of tensions via to the U.S. Making agreements with these more or less puppet vassal governments in Southeast Asia, with Philippines, Vietnam, Japan, and increasing the hostility within the South China Sea, and almost siding with these countries about these obscure islands that there are disputes over with China, and essentially coming out and saying, just like what the global community said with Russia, that Russia has no right to dictate what happens on its borders as far as overthrowing the Ukrainian government. It's the same thing with China and its sovereignty over the South China Sea. We're saying they don't have sovereignty. And now with Trump, you've got the economic war is becoming even much, much hotter under Trump and people like Steve Bannon. And I like to compare this and contrast this, what we're seeing with China, the hostility and the belligerency by the Trump people, with what we're seeing from the rest of the establishment community with Russia. I feel that where, you've got Trump being talked about as being the peace president because he doesn't want a heightening of relations with Russia, it seems he's doing the exact same heightening of tensions with China that the other side of this coin, this establishment coin, has been doing with Russia for so long.
Yes, that's a good point. So then it just becomes which other world major power with nuclear weapons do you want to saber rattle with, potentially threaten World War III with? So yeah, we need an actual, real, new multipolar world, and with we the people of the world in the driver's seat, really. And of course there can be cooperation here. It makes a lot of sense. As we were talking about in the False Flag Weekly News program with Professor Anthony Hall and the Silk Road, potential from China to England, and the potentials of major infrastructure and intercontinental high-speed trains, and the sharing of growing technology, much of it being suppressed out of very concentrated poles in the West, specifically the black technology that's being hid in the bowels of DC, basically. The world is ready to break out into a race to the top and a meritocratic approach to international relations, and of course this is where the idea of the nationalism that is both the nationalism and the populism that is represented by some of the ethos behind the political movements that were aligned towards Trump on the right and Bernie Sanders on the left, that is very real. It's a desire to return the power to the roots, to the people, to we the people. And then the nationalism thing is really about a return to the idea of national sovereignty. There's this I forget what the name of it is, but I think it's an anthropologist or sociologist who did a study that showed that the ideal number of individuals in a tribe or a community for it to work is somewhere in the realm of 150 to 200. And so that's about how many individual nation states we have in the current world. So we're situated very well to actually have a functioning community if we were able to clear the path for our authentic leadership to emerge rather than be suppressed, assassinated, disinformed, and for the sociopathic or even psychopathic to gain the commanding heights of the levers of power. So if the sane minds can grasp this situation, I see a lot of potential cooperation in the coming world, and I'm eager for that for my son and then his children to be able to have access to the world, for there to be you be able to hop on a train and go visit other continents and see the riches of this this beautiful planet and its beautiful peoples.
I could not agree more. And unfortunately, we've got a lot of people who claim to stand for alternative ideals who are making it much more difficult for us to achieve this great reality that you speak of. It's our duty to hold those people accountable and to challenge their assertions at every chance we get. People who listen to this podcast will know who and what institutions we're talking about. And speaking of some of those institutions, I'm getting a sense with the contrast with the way that Russia is treated and how China is treated by these people that are around Donald Trump, that I think a big part of it has to do with one of the big buzzwords of the alt-right, and that is globalism. And when I say that globalism, I mean that Russia is much more, or China is much more friendly to the current, I guess you call it neoliberal order as far as economic speaking, than the Russians are, and by extension the new regime under Trump here in the U.S. And I call it a regime. I think it's more accurately to call it a regime in many ways. But there's much more. I think China is much more in line with the European Union and big Western financial interest, economic interest, as far as trade goes with Europe, as far as business agreements with this European economic and political establishment that the Trump forces are actually trying to bring down throughout the West with all these various quote-unquote populist leaders who are speaking a very contrary economic and political agenda from what these Western establishment elite current governments are speaking. And China is much more in line with that, whereas Russia is makes no secret of its hostility and its very tensionship with the European Union and the European and Western financial economic elites in so many different ways. And with China, we're seeing, I think, what it is that this globalist rhetoric that China is much closer to these same forces, these boogeymen that are used by the alt-right, by the Alex Joneses and the Breitbarts to vilify anyone who opposes the Trump agenda as being, liberal, globalist, whatever buzzwords you want to use against them. China's way closer to this alliance, but China also has an alliance with Russia, and I get the impression that there's an effort to try to split this alliance between China and Russia, and like to get your feelings about that.
It does look like that, and the role of Kissinger in all of this, and watching him maneuver during the campaigns and trips to Russia, and interesting intrigue about Syria at that point. And then in China, Kissinger's history in China is infamous, really. And so there are many ways for the faction that it backs Trump to try to split Russia and China. And one thing is, in relationship to this economic model that you pointed to, that Russia is not as integrated into what's called the neoliberal globalist sort of manufacturing economy. It's a lot of its economy is based on what would be called commodities, oil, gas, food, these types of things, rather than value-added manufactured goods for the West, even in terms of China, that bring a high value in terms of trade relations. So that's one difference that can be used. So just such a thing as manipulating oil prices, gas prices. Alex Jones has been pointing out, how can Trump be a Russian tool because he's unleashing coal, and that's bad for Russian oil prices, I believe, is the argument. And it does look like that oil prices were being utilized to compromise Russia in the last years, after they'd gone to a really high level. And then some of the neoconservatives, such as the Kagans, Victoria Nuland, got themselves into these key positions in terms of foreign policy, and the Obama administration, and then oil prices began to fall again. It looked like it was also in conjunction with the move towards the coup in Ukraine, that ended up, drawing Russia in order to protect what was this long-term, protectorate in Crimea and Russian ethnically. And then that allowed for there to be rounds of sanctions to be applied, and so it did look like that there was a ratcheting up by elements of the neoconservatives and the neoliberals who aligned to create a new Cold War against Russia, or to try to put Russia into a compromised position. And whether there was this side chain Israeli connection to all of that, it looks like that's pretty apparent in terms of Ukraine and some of the key billionaire leaders who sort of moved into places of leadership after the coup. Israel actually sent special forces there. Who was involved in the sniping at both sides early in the Ukraine crisis? We don't know, but This seems like it's part of this shift in relationship to Netanyahu making a play in a way to put himself in the middle of all of this action, and we've spoken before about the as Israel's become more ethnically Russian, sort of from the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the transfer of more than 1 million people to Israel. It came also with a political shift towards the hardline right in Israel, where Netanyahu is now basically a moderate of some sort, and it's Naftali Bennett and Avigdor Lieberman, who is comes from came from the Soviet Union, who are now to consider the right, and that also then created this direct political relationship with elements of Russia over the years, especially in the last decade and a half. So there are the parameters are there for there to be different kinds of ways to get a lever in there and try to break Russia and China apart, because of course they both have relations with Iran. And if there really is a serious desire to attack Iran or overthrow the Iranian government, then there would have to be a way to at least peel one of those two, of China and Russia, away potentially from Iran. So the economics, military relations. Who knows where the split it might be exacerbated. But who knows? Maybe there's actually some type of multipolar power dynamic that's expressing itself in the United States in a way that it hasn't in a while, if ever, if maybe ever. In terms of the escalation of the understanding of the deep state, and if we can be a part of the conversation to understand the nature of the deep states, and understand the deep state faction that's behind Trump, then maybe we the people can throw a monkey wrench into the desire to escalate the tension or split Russia from China, and maybe we can all sit at the table together.
That's most certainly. Real quick before we move into our next topic, I wanted to elaborate on what you said about the multipolarity that we're seeing play out within the foreign policy establishment. I think that's certainly true. And you mentioned, of course, Robert Kagan, and the fact that while there was a lot of neoconservative opposition to Trump, Robert Kagan, of course, the co-founder of the Project for New American Century, along with Bill Kristol, Robert Kagan, unlike Bill Kristol and other prominent neoconservatives, did not just oppose Trump. He took it a step further and actually endorsed Hillary Clinton, wrote this op-ed in the Washington Post about how he fears of fascism under Trump and all this. And so I think with a lot of anti-war, anti-imperialist people who saw this, they saw Robert Kagan endorse Trump, and they thought, oh, in comparison, well, Trump must be good because look who's opposing him. And the role of Robert Kagan in helping to get that element of the population behind Trump, I don't think can be downplayed. But also Robert Kagan, when you see his policy compared to what the policy of other people affiliated with PNAC, which we've talked about before, like Frank Gaffney and his Center for Security Policy, which received $60,000 last year from AIPAC, which shows that AIPAC really doesn't have a problem with the hardcore anti-Islamic sentiment coming from the Gaffney wing of the neoconservative power structure. You can see, though, when you compare Kagan to Gaffney, that there is not a consensus on this foreign policy. This is not something where all of these elites are in lockstep with each other. And I think far too often, a lot of people try to create what I think increasingly believe is an overly simplistic analysis that all of these elites are in lockstep with each other and there is one elite agenda. There really is not.
Yes, and in terms of going back to North Korea, there's an interesting article if folks are interested in a serious counter narrative to everything that we are fed about North Korea and the history with the relations with North Korea. It's called North Korea: The Grand Deception Revealed, by Christopher Black. It's very interesting, and it points out that even the police action that started the Korean War, right? And it hasn't just we've basically been in a series of police actions in terms of the United States' wars post World War II. It appears in terms of the constitutional form of our government, and of course, we in the post 9/11 world, we're operating in some type of eternal or perpetual police action that's really a globalized terror war where the entire world is a battlefield. But that police action that started the Korean War in the UN supposedly was actually illegal because Russia was not even present for the vote in the Security Council. So in a way, you can see that this entire history is based on deception, on illegality. So yeah, we need rule of law, and really, I think that the best thing that the world at this point could see in terms of a chance at international rule of law is for we, the American people, to restore or enact some type of constitutional rule of law here at home. And then this, because we've just seen the escalation of treason, the dynamics of the escalation of treason in terms of these escalating police actions and these perpetual police actions, because our own politicians are too cowardly to actually try to convince us to go to war in an honest fashion. So basically, every time we are sent into a war, it's based on some type of grand deception, and whether it's a hoax that didn't happen, such as the Gulf of Tonkin, let it happen type of scenarios that are in resonance with Pearl Harbor, or the sort of ultimate treason of September 11th, where it's U.S. elements, allowing or in a combinatorial effort with foreign elements anchored around Israel to basically stage war in what ultimately became termed the homeland. And then we got the Department of Homeland Security enacted the Operation, the Phoenix program comes home, it goes domestic. And so, yeah, I think that the best thing for international law is we, the American people, to peacefully but firmly enact constitutional rule of law here at home.
Yeah, no question. And as with everything, it's going to take a lot of effort to make these things a reality. But it is our responsibility to work towards making these things realities. One of the topics I was going to get into on False Flag Weekly News before my phone died on me and I had a technological error with doing the live feed was an article that came out with another one of the topics that we've discussed quite a bit. An article came out, Daily Beast, another similar article came out in the forward. The two articles pretty much were the same thing. It was about a Twitter war of words between Richard Spencer, alt-right leader, and Paul Joseph Watson of Prison Planet. And they were going back and forth about the alt-right, or the alt-light, as Richard Spencer likes to call the InfoWars crowd. And then David Duke stepped in and pretty much tried to mediate the conflict and then took Richard Spencer's side. And what struck me out about this article is that you go any given day and you do a Google search for David Duke, or you do a Google search for Richard Spencer, or of course Alex Jones, who's constantly in the media now. I mean, his Alex Jones is such a meme at this point that a video made by Media Matters with Alex Jones saying, "I'm not bragging, but," and then Alex saying something completely offlandish when he's not bragging about something, has gone viral with millions of views. So what I'm seeing is the continual promotion and signal boosting and the continual promotion of these figures, while people like Professor Tony Hall, Joy Corriga in Ohio, and many others, Kevin Barrett or Christopher Berlin, are not getting any of this kind of signal boosting that the likes of Alex Jones and Paul Joseph Watson and Richard Spencer and David Duke constantly get. And to me, it shows that while these people are getting their books banned on Amazon.com and are being denied their tenureship as professors and not allowed to step foot on the institutions that they taught for 26 years in the case of Tony Hall, yet these people who are speaking much more limited truth, to be honest, that are made out to be like the dissidents opposing the established agenda, they're getting all of the coverage and probably all of the money, while the dissidents who go a step further and really get into the deception of September 11th and other important historical events, they don't have a platform. They're not getting all this promotion. So that's what I took from this, and I think it's important to understand this. And also this article that came out in the New Yorker about the new Gateway pundit, White House press correspondent Lucian Wintrick, goes into his life and how he operates and how the Gateway pundit operates. And of course, Gateway pundit's another part of this new right media apparatus, pretty much created in Israel, along with Breitbart and a few other sites. So the constant promotion and signal boosting of these figures, obviously people in the establishment want you to know who these people are, but they really don't seem to want you to know who Tony Hall is, or who Christopher Berlin is, or who Joy Corriga is.
Yes, it's definitely true. And what the other part about this incident, this article about the alt-right breakup, which is interesting, is that these splits in the Trump movement, really, the Trump backing movement, maybe it's the alt-right. So I think Paul Joseph Watson, for one, would probably say he's not really in the alt-right, right? And I guess that's the argument that he's having with Richard Spencer. And Spencer basically says, quote, "The alt-right is an identity movement, period. It's not about classical liberalism or hating Hillary," unquote. And so it's interesting. So the disagreement comes down to what is going to define our political success at some level. Is it going to be an identity movement, or is it going to be a sort of a libertarian qua reactionary against the Democrats, the SJWs, and Islam? And then, of course, there are overlaps there in terms of who they're against, and that's where some of the alliances come in. And so I guess my point of all of this is that neither one of these is any recipe for any type of real political success over the long term. And yeah, I mean, I think Spencer is actually being very honest in terms of the idea of the alt-right. He founded the term, right? So maybe in some ways he gets to define it. And it is an identity movement. And the question is it really a productive and self-respecting or self-revivifying identity movement, or is it really based on trying to reclaim the reactionary identity of whiteness, which is not really about an indigenous identity in the truest sense of the words, which would actually be Europeanness? Which you could even say that the burgeoning identity over the last few hundred years of Americanness, those would be indigenous. They would have become indigenous identity political movements of some way. But if the alt-right is based around whiteness and the West, these are really reactionary terms. These are countervalent terms that don't really exist in reality. And whiteness was basically it was a way to dissolve European identity into a singular identity that was then put on a hierarchical, put above blackness in a hierarchy of power and privilege, really. And so whiteness is not about European identity. Whiteness is basically is attached to a slave society. So if what you're really trying to do is recreate a slave society or a supremacist society, then yeah, I think you're going to basically be not accepted by a large bunch of people, and there's going to be a lot of pushback. And more importantly, I think you're on the wrong side of history, which history is there is an evolution in history towards greater unity in greater diversity. So if the alt-right is thinking about the idea, if it's basically going through its black power phase, and that people of European background are going through their black power phase, but it's sort of seen as a white nationalism that's really about reclaiming their own cultural identity, their own pride in their own background, in their own historical and their own familial lineage, and it's a cultural movement. Then there probably is a lot of there probably is a lot of positive cultural richness in that. But there's a difference between that and a political movement of the 21st century. And then, of course, Paul Joseph Watson, he doesn't even have an identity, apparently. He basically bounces from identity to identity. We identified that Paul Joseph Watson more than 10 years ago was calling Michael Savage an oily beatnik neocon. And now his boss, Alex Jones, is sidling up to him and praising him as, part of the core team. Drudge and Trump and Alex Jones and Michael Savage and Breitbart. And these are the patriots, And these are not the patriots.
Might as well put Sean Hannity in that grouping.
I guess so. So Paul Joseph Watson is basically apparently has embraced a politics of what he's against. He's from England, so at the very least, his reaction to the migrant crisis in Europe, it makes a little bit more sense than all the obsessions of all the people in the United States of America, where there's no Muslim migrant crisis. There's not even really a Muslim. There's no Islamic extremist terrorism problem in the United States of America. It's very difficult to identify a well verified Islamic terrorist attack of significant size in the United States of America. Basically, what we've seen, the big one, September 11th, any Arab or Muslim men were patsies at best, not involved, probably really at some level, and it was done by elements deep within our society, elements that are backing Trump. Elements that are brought into the Congress and given tons of standing ovations. Elements that slept in the bed of Trump's son-in-law and advisor. These are the elements where the threats of terrorism have really come from the United States of America. Even the more recent terrorist attacks. San Bernardino, the big one. San Bernardino, Orlando. These are black operations. There's drills. There's people. There's all kinds of problems with the narrative. There are multiple shooters, and then it's blamed on the brown-skinned patsies, whether they were involved or not. Sometimes it looks maybe they weren't even involved. Maybe other times they were. But for this whole idea of the sort of Paul Joseph Watson side of the Trump movement, where they've become obsessed with the threat of Islam, It doesn't make sense in the United States of America. Like, if you want to obsess about Europe and what Europe's encountering, okay. If you're like, really, that's your whole thing, is you're a geopolitical scholar and you're European based and that's what you want to like really focus on, then I understand you want to talk about that all the time. But if you're based on American politics and you're always talking about the European issues, then there's something else going on here. There's some type of proxy political conversation going on. And then when you couple that, in the case of Paul Joseph Watson and InfoWars and Alex Jones, with regressing in a very deep fashion in terms of September 11th, and basically missing every single false flag at the very least, since the rise of Trump in terms of his candidacy, then there's something going on here that doesn't have to do with honesty in relationship to politics. This is politics of its worst sort, and I think that all of us who are serious about the idea of the truth movement, we actually take the truth seriously, fundamental. It's not the end all and be all, because I think most people who are involved in truth politics, it's not just the truth for the sake of the truth. It's the truth because it's the best way to get towards justice, peace, and freedom. So that's the kind of politics that we need to resurrect. And so it's interesting that all of these people appear to miss the nature of the deep state backing of the high-level terrorism in the United States of America. So we don't have an Islam problem in the United States of America. We continue to have an oligarchically based, deep state-sponsored scapegoat terrorism problem. So let's agree that we're against terrorism. Let's figure out, who and what exactly happened in these cases, and let's arrest those people, and then let's see what we can actually create in terms of a new rejuvenated economy for the 21st century from there.
Yeah, I love what you said there about the whole idea and tendency of scapegoating this reactionary politics, and whether it's the kosher friendly InfoWars or whether it's David, everything is Jews, Duke. The common thread that they have is that, of course, in the case of InfoWars, at one point they didn't, but now InfoWars completely, of course, misses the point when it comes to terrorism and questioning these narratives that are force-fed to us. But
I just want to push back really quickly in terms of the idea of the kosher-friendly InfoWars, just by saying that terrorism is not kosher, as far as I understand it. And InfoWars has a tendency to sort of go to the ethnic explanation whenever he's trying to escape, whenever Alex is trying to escape the hard facts of Zionist power and the Jewish power syndicate, these types of scenarios, like that time that I called in and he tried to wiggle away from the hard facts of the Zionist involvement in September 11th by talking about how many Jews voted against Trump. So in a way, that's a sort of anti-kosher. I don't know. Just a minor point. Sorry.
No, you make a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. That is a good point. And I say that I more or less play on the idea of, of an outlet like InfoWars having an agenda that is very friendly to Israel and organized Zionist power. Although I do think that some of these alt-right people who are more overly anti-Jewish in their actual tone and rhetoric, I do think that they, in many ways, do serve the same agenda in some ways. But I think to wrap up this element of the conversation, I think that it's important that the reactionary elements are the ones that get all the attention, who completely miss the boat on terrorism, and even like an anti-Zionist, or someone who is supposed to be against Israel and against Zionism, still have a vested interest in pushing this official narrative of terrorism because it fits their narrative that their countries are being overran and are being destroyed from within by this massive immigration policy. So therefore, they don't want to question these terrorist events. And on the flip side of it, of course, you've got the people who are just out to create a war against Islam altogether, and their paths converge. Meanwhile, you've got people like Tony Hall who are not into this divide and conquer reactionary rhetoric, scapegoating people who are actually getting to the bottom of the real roots of the war on terrorism and what's really happening with these events. And he doesn't get any of this coverage. He's not a divisive figure. He's somebody who could actually bring people together if his message was heard. And he doesn't get the platform, and he's had his platform taken away from him and does not have the media access and the media throwing him stories about him out there to people for their consumption. So
it's a very good point, because Tony Hall he doesn't disparage the idea of nationalism, of ethnic identity when it comes to European background. He understands where people are coming from too, so he sort of holds a deeper basin of political understanding, I think. And so you're right, it's very suspicious that someone like him is not only not given a platform, but has their pre-existing earned platform of tenure being stripped from him, specifically because of talking about the Zionist influence on our politics and the nature of the Jewish power syndicate. And then the Jewish Power Syndicate comes after him. So, and then I just want to make one last point before we move on to our next and last topic, that this idea of identity, I think it's very interesting, but I also think it's very dangerous, because to me it looks like what's been identified by people like Jan Irvin and Joe Atwill in terms of the CIA, the deep CIA history of basically inserting an idea of a nativist revival, or a native revival that's being implanted from outside to a native group of people, but then it makes it seem like it's they came up with reviving their native ways, and in so doing, what is done is a way of actually corrupting the culture from the inside out, and what also happens, and this is related to what was done in the 60s, is becomes a higher and higher emphasis on cultural dynamics and expressions of one's identity, rather than the expressions of one's principles and the nature of one's politics, which a lot of times have immediate ethical responsibilities, such as being anti-war, anti-unjust war, or these types of scenarios. And so that is the danger of that identity movement, even if it didn't slip into white supremacism and reactionary racism. Even if it were authentic European revivalism of some sort, it could actually just be a new box for the powers to be to put a rising populism of the white right.
Oh, no question. And I think that although there are some people who have principled viewpoints who are involved in these kind of movements, but, they're few and far between. And certainly the way the establishment is using this populism here in the West, this right-wing white populism in the West, it's certainly being used to suit the needs of people in positions of power and influence. I don't really think any honest person can really deny that if they would really take a look at where things are and how the narrative is being shaped right now. On our last topic, we're going to talk a little bit about an article that was written by Graham McQueen, posted on the Truth and Shadows blog. Title of it was title was Beyond Their Wildest Dreams, 9/11 and the American Left. And in this article, Graham McQueen goes into depth in comparing. I think it's pretty much a comparison of a lot of these leaders like Hugo Chavez and even Fidel Castro, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in Iran, Mahathir Mohamad in Malaysia, and how they have been in past tense, in the case of Chavez and Castro, were pretty forceful in questioning and asserting that the official September 11th narrative was a lie, as well as the John F. Kennedy assassination narrative. Of course, Castro in some ways was blamed for that by some people. And, I didn't know Castro had said these things about September 11th, so it's really interesting to me. But compare and contrast that to the response of the American left, progressive left intellectuals like Noam Chomsky, or for a historical basis, I.F. Stone, who has the prestigious Muckraking Award named after him. Or now, one of our biggest progressive intellectuals, Chris Hedges, who just recently equated questioning who knocked the towers down with a lot of Trump's other more ridiculous campaign statements. And in this, I was thinking in an interview that Abby Martin of Empire Files just did with a woman, with Sherry Roberts on a podcast, where she was essentially placing the blame for people not wanting to be part of the, quote, 9/11 truth movement on the truth movement itself. Basically she's asserting that truth movement's full of unstable individuals who just threaten and troll anyone who doesn't go lockstep with their narrative. This is a big problem, and perhaps you can take a couple minutes to give your thoughts about this.
Yes, this is a big problem. So we've talked about the problem of the controlled right, but there's also a major problem in terms of the controlling of the left, especially in the United States of America, where the left, because of the dynamics of the Cold War, the left is the natural place for the roots of the dissidents in this country to come from, and in many ways we've been neutered from having a credible left with serious analytical teeth. And Noam Chomsky, it's just incredible. You'd have to invent Noam Chomsky if we didn't have one, in order to try to cover up all of these deep events. Every single deep event, somehow Noam Chomsky misses it, and then he makes fun of people who don't miss it. And of course, Chris Hedges, I read on a 9/11 blogger post that Bob McIlvaine, who's one of the few family members of 9/11 victims, who's been vocal consistently over the years and has been willing to talk about the obvious demolitions, and that's how his son was murdered. And he asked Christopher Hedges, why doesn't the left take up our cause? It's so obvious, it would be so beneficial to what they say they're about. And then Hedges told him it was cowardice. And so then to see the meta irony there of Hedges talking about the cowardice when he doubles down, almost like a Bill Moyers, and when Bill Moyers talked about the 9/11 truth folks or the most Orwellian, and Hedges celebrating the 10th anniversary of September 11th by tripling down on the Al-Qaeda mythos. And then, of course, back to Noam Chomsky. Who are the upcoming left intellectuals who have access to Noam Chomsky? Abby Martin is one of them. Abby Martin has very powerful journalistic chops, but when she gets access to Noam Chomsky, there's not a word about September 11th and the obvious fraudulent, racist, scapegoating nature of the global war of terror that it started. And so this
Let me throw the name Max Blumenthal in there too.
Yes, and so this conversation of Sherry Roberts and Abby Martin was sort of infuriating at some level. I'm glad that they're having it, and I want there to be more conversations about that. And so I'm hoping that we can spark some more of that type of conversation. And I think the answer to all of this is for us to not only dialogue, but to also to debate and be willing to disagree out in the open. And we've talked about this before. And we've run out of time here, and we'll continue to cover this into the future. But Greg and I here at The Antidote, we seek to up the ante in terms of the solution to our analytical problems. So until next week, we salute you.
Yes, and once again, remember, the ball is in your court. We're offering debate and dialogue. The ball is in the court of those who do not agree with us to come out and have a conversation about this. We're more than willing to. We'll be more than fair, and let's just get this conversation out.